It is a pleasure and an honor tonight to have Harvard President Larry Bacow with us. President Bacow, welcome. It's good to see you. You're looking good.
Good to see you as well. Thank you.
President Bacow is the 29th president of Harvard University. He is one of the most widely experienced leaders in American higher education, known for his commitment to expanding student opportunity, catalyzing academic innovation, and encouraging universities' civic engagement and service to society. President Bacow is the former president of Tufts University and past chancellor and chair of the faculty at MIT. President Bacow, when I think first heard of your appointment as president of Harvard was not from an email from Harvard, but from a friend of mine who was then the dean of the University of Chicago School of Divinity. And he said just very quickly that you were an incredible mensch. I think all of us have felt incredible pride to have you as our president. I know we have a beautiful picture of you hanging a mezuzah in the president's home, hanging up at Harvard Hillel. But when I think of you, what comes to my mind is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Father, where it states there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. I think each of those might describe in some way what it means to be the president of Harvard. But the Mishnah continues, but the crown of a good name supersedes them all. And you have certainly gained for yourself a reputation as being an incredible mensch. I've seen it myself when you've come to Harvard Hillel in your interactions with me and my fellow staff, and all the more so as students. So it's been a real honor to have you as our president, and even greater honor to have you with us this evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I appreciate that.
Also with us this evening is Ben Rabinowitz. Ben is a rising senior at Harvard College, where he is studying applied mathematics and economics. Ben is also the founder of the Harvard Jewish Sports Initiative, which seeks to highlight the intersection of Jewish values and qualities of character that promote athletic excellence. Ben, I would say you are a walking role model of someone who has the qualities of character that promote excellence overall. I first met you, I believe you were just a junior in high school, and you were visiting Harvard, and you asked if you could become a gabbai. I think the closest thing is maybe a sexton, a lay leader of our minyan. And immediately when you came to Harvard, you sought out that position, and you have held that position and done incredible things. You've arranged for a Torah scroll dedication, a chazanis concert, a cantorial concert, and much more. But the thing that I want to emphasize the most is on Saturday night, after we conclude with Shabbat and we have Havdalah, all the students go downstairs to have dinner, and I usually go to my office to clean up a bit. And when I come out, I find you washing the Kiddush cup and sometimes scraping off the melted wax from the Havdalah candle. You are really someone who is dedicated to our entire community in the grand things and also the small ones as well. So it's a pleasure to have you here this evening to interview President Bacow. There is a Q&A feature, so feel free to start asking some questions. And in the meantime, I and my colleague Jamie Drucker will be sorting through those in the background. And it's my pleasure to turn the table over to Ben Rabinowitz and President Bacow.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dani, for those kind words of introduction. As Rabbi Dani mentioned, my name is Ben Rabinowitz, and I'm a rising senior. It sounds weird to say rising senior at the college studying applied math and economics. I would first like to also say how glad I was to hear of both your and Mrs. Bacow's recovery from the coronavirus. And I would also like to extend my best wishes to both of you for continued good health. You know, I think that for a lot of people at the time that you announced that both you and Mrs. Bacow had been diagnosed with the coronavirus, they did not know anyone else who had the disease. So you're being so bold and open about having COVID made it both a lot less removed and a lot less terrifying for people in the Harvard community. Why did you decide to be so public about your diagnosis, and how were you able to be so strong in your recovery?
Well, first of all, Ben, thanks for the invitation to participate and for the opportunity to have a conversation. And thanks again to Rabbi Dani for those kind words of introduction. You know, when you're president, there are no secrets. Neither Adele nor I knew what path this virus might take. And rather than find ourselves, you know, in the hospital and then people speculating about our health, we thought it best just to share with everybody. We knew at the time that we were probably among the first people that folks would know, and partly what we wanted to do is to send a message to the community that everybody needed to be careful, that they needed to take this seriously, that it was important to engage in social distancing, and that virtually anybody was at risk. And so That's why we shared it. Unfortunately, that's also why at the end we were able to share that we had recovered. And so.
Exactly. I think a lot goes into being able to recover from the virus. I was wondering, what role did faith play in your recovery?
Well, we were the beneficiary of many prayers and good wishes. And those were all much appreciated by everyone. I also have to say that Adele and I never felt like our life was in danger while we were dealing with this. So, we didn't allow ourselves to go to a place where we were praying for our own recovery. It just, we were very, very fortunate in our case. This felt a lot like the flu. We avoided the kinds of respiratory problems that landed many, many people in the hospital and on life support or worse. So we consider ourselves fortunate and blessed to have emerged from this, healthy on the other side. That said, it wasn't fun. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Absolutely. I think we're all, so glad that you both have recovered and, didn't experience some serious case like, others have. Obviously, the upcoming fall semester is something that is on a lot of people's minds. As reported by the Crimson, you recently told the Faculty of Arts and Sciences that a return to normal by the beginning of this upcoming fall semester is unlikely. Additionally, Dr. Anthony Fauci said last week in his testimony before the United States Senate Committee on Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions that he thought that the development of a vaccine before the start of the fall semester is a bridge too far right now. It has also been said that a return to campus would take place in a gradual process. Of course, much still remains to be seen. However, perhaps you can expand on what that gradual process may look like. What would it take to resume on-campus activities in any capacity, especially given how densely populated the undergraduate residential houses are? And how do you foresee academic, social, and athletic activities once students begin to return?
So there are a lot of questions embedded in that, so let me try and unpack them a little bit. When I said to the faculty that the fall would not be normal, I literally meant it would not be normal under any circumstances. If students were back, people would be masked. It was highly likely that we would have to engage in an extreme form of social distancing, that there would be regular testing, contact tracing, if necessary, isolation of students who had exhibited symptoms. So I think there are lots of things which we're all experiencing right now, whether or not we're on campus or off campus, which are not normal. And I think until we have a vaccine, it's probably going to be the case that things will continue to be not normal, at least normal before any of us could spell COVID or knew what a coronavirus was. So with respect to the fall and what that looks like, we're still waiting to see. We've made an announcement, for example, that second, third, and fourth year medical students and third and fourth year dental students will be on campus studying. Now, there's a reason for that. One cannot be trained as a physician or a dentist without having the opportunity to be in clinic, without working with patients. And so part of what one learns to do as a doctor or a dentist in training is to deal with the kinds of procedures that one needs to take to ensure that you're safe and the patient is also safe, that there's no, or at least a small likelihood of transmission of disease. As we look at the fall, we'll be guided by a number of things. One is, what's the status of the virus at the time of the pandemic? There's concern right now that we could see a rise in cases as people start to relax their social distancing, as various states and communities open up. We'll be watching about what happens not just in Boston, but what happens elsewhere. As you know, we're a campus that welcomes students literally from around the world. And so we have to be cognizant that people could be coming to campus for places where the virus is more prevalent than it is here. Once people get back to campus, we will, in deciding whether or not to bring people back, we will be looking at the state of personal protective equipment and the availability of it, of the availability of testing. And for testing, it's important that we have access to testing which is reliable, which is affordable, which is quick, and which is available. And if you relax any of those conditions, it makes it very difficult to use testing really to sort of screen a population. We'll have to take a look at the capacity to limit people's contact, not just with each other, but with visitors to the campus, and what happens when people go off campus. So there are a whole variety of things which we're looking at. In the end, we're going to be guided by health and safety. And the issue is candidly less the health and safety of our students, because young people are, by and large, if they don't have a pre-existing condition, generally not much at risk for this disease, although the disease itself has the capacity to mutate, and we have to watch out for that as well. You know, as we've all read, we're reading about the vulnerability of children now to certain manifestations of this disease that were not clear several months ago. But others are very much at risk. Those who are older and those who have pre-existing conditions. And we need to be concerned about our faculty and staff, the people who routinely come in contact with our students. We also have to make sure that we have the capacity, once we bring people back, to actually teach them on campus. And here, depending upon the degree of social isolation or social distancing that's required, our supply of classrooms may be severely stressed. So there are, you know, I could go on. There are just a whole host of nested decisions that are quite complicated. The governor of Massachusetts announced today that we're going to be able to restart our laboratory functions quite shortly. And so that'll be the first thing that will come back. And as we reopen laboratories where those who work in them are used to working under controlled conditions, often with materials and substances that require masking and other things, we'll be bringing back the graduate students who work in those labs. Probably the next thing that will come back are libraries, archives, museums that scholars and their students need access to in order to be able to do their research. And so there will be a reopening that will be gradual, some of which will occur over the summer as people gain access to these facilities. And we'll have to see where things are in the fall. It's still too early to predict.
Absolutely. You know, continuing in this vein of how coronavirus will impact universities, the economic damage that the pandemic has already and will continue to cause is immense. Though Harvard is projected to suffer hundreds of millions of dollars in losses this upcoming fiscal year, it will be able to sustain the blow far better than smaller institutions, which have far fewer financial holdings. Are you concerned that less affluent universities may not be able to recover from the pandemic? And if so, what role do you believe Harvard plays, if any, in the higher education system to support these institutions?
Well, I mean, probably the biggest role that we play is in trying to help provide advice, guidance, scholarship in dealing with the coronavirus. Harvard has become one of the centers worldwide for research on this disease. We formed a partnership early on, actually in January, with the Guangzhou Institute for Respiratory Health in China, where SARS was first diagnosed. And that's led to something which we call the Mass Consortium on Pathogen Readiness, which includes Harvard, MIT, Tufts, BU, University of Massachusetts, the Broad Institute, the Raygon Institute, all of our affiliated teaching hospitals, as well as the local biotech community. We are working on the development of rapid diagnostic tests, which could help us, not just Harvard, but everyone. In higher education, we're working on treatments, and we're also working on vaccines. I'm proud of the fact that the two first vaccines that have gone into human trials have come out of Harvard-affiliated laboratories. So I think that's really where we can help and help the most. Each institution needs to make its own decision And each institution is in a slightly different situation. Urban institutions are very different than rural institutions. One of the things which we have to worry about, which other urban institutions have to be concerned about, is that many of our employees get here on public transit. And that's not the case, let's say, at Cornell or Dartmouth, just in the Ivy League. Different institutions that have commuter students are in different positions. Those that have a high proportion of international students are in different positions to be able to reopen. Right now, the United States is not processing F1 visas, which international students need to gain entrance into this country. So even within Harvard, each of our schools is in a slightly different position. So you're going to see some variability even within Harvard in terms of how we respond and how we open, and that will be true across higher education. But I do worry about the impact on institutions that don't have the resources that we do, or in some cases don't have the market position we do. It's really more the latter that matters, that there are institutions that I think are concerned that if they can't reopen this year in a manner that looks pretty similar to how they've reopened every year, that they may not survive to next year because students may not come in subsequent years. I don't think that's a big concern that we or institutions like us have at the moment.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And as a reminder to the audience, people should continue to submit questions they would like to ask President Bacow in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. President Christina Paxson of Brown University wrote in her widely read April 26th opinion piece in the New York Times that college campuses must reopen in the fall because too much is at stake, as we've been alluding to, with the stifling of academic development and vast economic fallout among some of the significant prices that will be paid should the upcoming semester be remote. I was wondering what cooperation or coordination has there been, if any, between universities regarding the upcoming semester?
So there's a lot of conversation among university presidents, and I participate regularly in meetings. Yesterday, the Ivy presidents got together. We're meeting basically every 2 weeks via Zoom. I participated in a call recently from the American Council on Education, which meets weekly. I'm on the board of that. That represents higher education more broadly. The American Association of Universities gets together, and a number of us just pick up the phone and talk to our colleagues at other places. So there's a lot of conversation, but again, each institution has to do what's right for them, and each institution is in a slightly different position. One way in which we differ at the undergraduate level is that we essentially house almost all of our undergraduates in Harvard-affiliated housing. That's not true for other institutions. So the availability of housing is a consideration. So we talk, we try to share knowledge, but each institution in the end is going to make their own decision. And I think actually if you read some of President Paxson's subsequent communications to Brown, notwithstanding her op-ed piece, Brown is still trying to figure out what it's going to do in the fall and has not made a commitment to bring all undergraduates back.
Absolutely. If I could just zone in on the Harvard-specific issue that you brought up about the vast majority of undergraduates living in Harvard residential housing, how do you foresee social distancing being able to be maintained in the houses? Even just thinking about shared bathrooms or shared suites.
Yeah, so we're looking at that right now. We're trying to figure out how we will make that work. And we're looking at what kind of requirements or guidance we're going to receive from the state. If there are some that have proposed that we adhere to a rule of no more than one student per room and per bathroom, that would be exceedingly problematic, not just for us, but for almost every other institution. We will be monitoring the situation. We're taking a look at all sorts of contingencies and possibilities. But we'll have more to say about that when things come into sharper focus from us in terms of what's going to be required.
Absolutely. And I think something else that a lot of people are thinking about is the possibility of the upcoming semester at least beginning remotely. Thank God I am at home with my parents and my brother and was able to successfully complete my coursework this semester virtually. However, as I'm sure that many others feel, there's nothing that can really replicate being on campus. The university administration has said that Harvard will be in session in the fall, whether on campus or remote. However, there has been some pushback to the possibility of the fall being online. In fact, as of last Tuesday evening, nearly 700 undergraduates, alumni, and parents had signed the No Virtual Fall petition, condemning the decision to open in the fall no matter what. What would you say to an undergraduate considering taking the upcoming semester off or even a gap year in the event that the fall semester begins?
So I think people need to do what they think is right for them. I would say for those who are thinking about taking a gap year or taking a semester off, people need to think hard about what they're going to do with that time. If it proves the case that that we cannot safely have students on this campus, now there probably aren't going to be a lot of good things for people to do in terms of internships or what they would typically do in a gap year. And then I think students and their parents need to ask themselves, are they better off sitting at home watching Netflix and playing video games or doing something productive? We also don't know, if we start the semester remotely, and again, we haven't made a decision, but if we do, that doesn't mean the whole semester is going to be remote. I mean, we could, if we're able to have students back on campus, we would like to have people back on campus as soon as possible, but only if we can do so safely. It's very easy to sign a petition and say, we demand that people come back. But, I feel that I have a responsibility, not just to our students, but to our students, our faculty, our staff, and our neighbors. And those in the greater Cambridge community, Boston community, to not do something that will put human life at risk. And so in the end, public health and safety has to come first. And we will prioritize that over everything else.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Thinking about the decision process, about whether or not to return or to begin the semester remotely or whatever the decision may be, throughout this public health crisis, people have utilized various mediums and outlets to stay informed. I was curious, what sources of information have you turned to for scientific data, both on a state and international level?
Well, here I'm the beneficiary of the fact that our faculty represent some of the world's foremost authorities when it comes to infectious disease, epidemiology, virology, public health. There is not a single aspect of the science of this disease that we don't have extraordinary subject matter expertise on this campus. And so those are the people that I'm turning to. In some cases, I'm turning to alums who are deeply involved in this at other institutions as well. But our decision-making to send people home in March was informed by the best scientific evidence available, and we will continue to make our judgments based upon the best scientific evidence that's available.
Absolutely. And maybe to backtrack a little bit to discuss the original decision to remove, to de-densify the campus by the Sunday of spring break already over 2 months ago. While it felt quite surreal at the time, it was definitely a prescient decision that you made. Yes, specifically, at what point did Harvard become aware of the severity of COVID-19, and what specifically in the models did you see at the time that led you to the conclusion that you reached?
So we had been monitoring this virus for almost the time it broke out in China, partly because, again, our faculty who focus on issues of infectious disease and epidemiology and virology, it got their attention. And once it got their attention, it got our attention as well. And then as conditions continued to worsen in Wuhan, we followed it very, very closely, in part because we have lots of students and faculty from China and who travel back and forth to China as well. And so we started to be concerned about the possibility of transmission of the disease from visitors from our campus to that region of China and those from that region who were coming to visit here. Then we started following things as they progressed in Italy, in Spain and other places that were having outbreaks, as well as in the United States. once it was clear that there were cases that were starting here in Massachusetts, we followed it extremely closely. And, you know, early on, we looked at, we created a crisis management team that was looking at how we would respond if we had an incidence of the coronavirus on our campus, but more importantly, how we would think if there was a breakout similar to what was happening in other regions of the world. That group started doing planning. We started thinking, suppose, you know, we couldn't have students in class. How would we teach remotely? At that point, we started looking at issues of bandwidth, at Zoom capacity, what it would take in order to be able to teach remotely, bringing up the capability of doing that. We also recognized pretty quickly that if that happened, it was likely that we would have to be able to operate the university remotely, that if people couldn't safely be on campus, it might mean that people had to work from their homes. So we started testing basic systems that are necessary in order to operate the university, accounts payable, accounts receivable, I mean, there's a whole host of systems which are necessary in order to operate the university. We made sure we could operate those remotely. Then we just watched things and it was clear. I mean, in Boston, the number of cases diagnosed went in the 4 days before, you know, we announced that we were going to send people home. If memory serves me correctly, we went from 13 to 28 to 42 to 91 cases. You know, you're an applied math major, you understand.
Exponential growth.
Yeah, there was an exponential growth rate, which is what we had seen elsewhere. We also knew something more at that point about the nature of this virus, that there was a long latency period where people were highly infectious before they exhibited any symptoms, when they were asymptomatic, which made it very, very contagious. Candidly, at that point, we did not realize how deadly this virus could be. That would come later. But we had seen it in, you know, some cases of that, certainly in Italy and in China as well. So we were the second university, I think, in the country that announced that it was sending students home. Our timing was driven by a number of things. One was just the timing of spring break. We were worried what would happen if students left for spring break and went, in some cases, all over the world and then came back. If we didn't have the infection here at that point, we would, most likely, once people returned. We were worried about being able to control an outbreak on the campus, so we didn't have enough spaces to isolate students if they needed to be isolated. And so the timing of the announcement was very much driven by spring break. I knew at the time that we would be criticized heavily for acting prematurely. And in fact, I thought it would be fun to publish my email on March 11th, the day after. If you could see the messages that I got from students, that I got from their parents, that I got from others who were upset with what we were doing. But, you know, I developed a pretty standard response to people. And that was, you know, I said to people, I hope you're right and we're wrong, right? Because if you're right and I'm wrong, then we will have inconvenienced a lot of people and we would have squandered a lot of resources. But if we didn't act, okay, and we were wrong, we would put many, many lives at risk. So, you know, from a decision theory standpoint, the costs of being wrong were asymmetrical. And so it actually wasn't a very hard decision to make. It was pretty clear what I thought, you know, that we needed to do what we did. I also thought that because we were Harvard, we would actually make it easier for other institutions to act. So I said the only institution that acted before us was the University of Washington in Seattle, and they had already had a breakout on their campus. So, you know, we did what we thought was right, and you know, everything comes into sharper focus in the rearview mirror. I would like to tell you, I was certain we were right, and I knew that we would be vindicated. But you know, in a job like this, you try and assemble the best information that you have available to you, and you try and make the best informed choice that you can. And in retrospect, it looks pretty good. And, we continue to try and make the best choices that we can. Let me also say that we did not get everything right. And we made mistakes along the way in how we de-densified the campus, but we tried to correct those errors as soon as they became apparent. And that's what we'll do going forward. Nobody bats 1,000. Bat 300 lifetime in baseball, and you got a shot at the Hall of Fame.
That's another baseball metaphor.
Yep.
Bottom of the second inning. One final question before I'll turn to the audience.
Sure.
In 1947, at Harvard commencement, then Secretary of State George Marshall famously articulated what would later become known as the Marshall Plan. As starvation throughout Europe became more rampant and the threat of communism grew, Europe faced a humanitarian crisis. It was then that Secretary Marshall called upon the leadership of the United States to confront these challenges. Now, I wouldn't want you to share any spoilers of your upcoming remarks at graduation. However, 73 years later, in the midst of another most precarious time, what are your thoughts for graduates?
So I haven't written my remarks yet for commencement, but I will tell you that I've been spending a lot of time reading about how Harvard has handled other crises. And what's interesting is, since I always like to point out, on the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, Harvard was 140 years old. Okay, and just to put that in context, that's older than Stanford is today. So we had been around for a while. And if you go back and look at our close to 400-year history, we've been tested previously. And in fact, almost every generation is tested in one way or another. And Harvard and its community has always responded to these challenges. And I think we'll respond to this one. It is, I think, up to us, both individually and collectively, to figure out what we are going to do to repair this broken world, right? That is, tikkun olam is an imperative which all of us, I think, understand. And each of us has to make individual decisions and collective decisions. I've been really, really proud of how the community has generally responded to this challenge so far. And I don't just mean our faculty and their graduate students and others who are doing research on this problem, but how people have put others before self, how they've reached out to try and help others in need, how people help students move out of their dorms when the time came, how they helped them get home, how when students got home and they didn't have a good place, where they had good internet access, others helped them find it. So I'd like to think that situations like this bring out the best in people, and we've seen an awful lot of good from a lot of folks, and I would hope that that would continue, and that people would find something to take from their experience at Harvard and go forth and do something good with it to make this world a fair, a more just, a more interesting place.
Absolutely, that's a very uplifting message. Rabbi Dani, I think we can turn to the audience now.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to begin with Alyssa Klee. Alyssa's a rising junior. Alyssa, can I ask you to unmute yourself and show us your video, and you can ask your question to President Bacow.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for taking my question. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So one question that I had, and I think a lot of the undergraduate population was also thinking about, was in terms of grading. Obviously, we had this semester the emergency sat unsat. However, I was wondering a bit more about if we're online in the fall, what are you guys considering about grading, and also like what are some different factors that you guys are weighing in like making this decision? Because obviously the circumstances that a lot of people are living in are remaining the same. But the thing is, like, if we have sat unsat again, people's GPAs like won't be able to improve, especially if they're trying to raise it before they graduate. So I guess people were wondering a bit about what that decision-making process is going to look like.
Well, first, Alyssa, thank you very much for your question. Decisions about grading actually get made by each individual faculty. So that's a decision that was made by the Faculty of Arts and Sciences for grading of undergraduates. It was not made university-wide. Different decisions were made by different schools, within Harvard. And so I'm not trying to dodge your question. It's literally, I can't answer it because if it's the case that we're online in the fall, that decision will be made once again by the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And actually, I was not involved at all in the decision to go, SAT, emergency SAT, unsat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alyssa. We're going to turn to an HLS alum, Mordechai Hartman. Mordechai, if you're able to unmute yourself and turn on your video, please go ahead and ask your question to President Bacow.
Hi, President Bacow. Thanks. This is a real honor. I also want to say thank you to Rabbi Dani for these Zoom events. They're incredible. I was wondering which one of Harvard's schools is best primed to do well remotely. And a more pressing question, President Bacow, I noticed that your haircut looks great. I'm wondering who gave you that haircut?
So I've had 2 haircuts, both by Adele, my wife, and she went online and she watched 3 YouTube videos before she cut my hair. So I credit it all to Adele. Asking me which school is best prepared is sort of like asking a parent which one of their children do they love the most. Each of our schools is working very, very hard to prepare for this. Each faces very, very different challenges. I talked a little bit previously about the dental school and the medical school. But Mordechai, as you know, one of the issues which the law school is dealing with right now are requirements for students to take the bar, which differ from state to state, and whether or not various states are going to accept online education as part of their bar requirements. So the law school has its own issues. The Kennedy School, 50% of the students from the Kennedy School come from abroad. And if we're not processing F1 visas, they're not going to be able to gain access. So the Kennedy School has to think about things differently. So every school has its own individual situation. And I think each is working very hard and I think quite productively to address it.
Thank you, Mordechai. Great to see you. We're now going to turn to rising senior Davey Schoenberg. From the looks of things, I'm guessing Davey is at Logan Airport. Davey, go ahead.
I'm grateful for the number of opportunities we've had to hear from you collectively, including today and the interfaith event yesterday. I know that Harvard's president has a very large amount to do, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on the importance of you, as Harvard's president, meeting with undergraduate students individually, whether to just get to know them or to make yourself available if there are those for whom the normal Harvard processes have been insufficient and they are looking for your support.
Well, thanks for the question, Davey. I actually take a group of first-year students as advisees each year. I did it last year, I did it this year. So I meet with my first-year advisees, and I've been in touch with them while they've been away from campus over these last couple of months. I also have office hours. So I meet with students during office hours. And then I try to accept as many invitations as I can when, of course, now none of us are on campus, but over the last couple of years, when students have invited me to have dinner in the houses, I've done that. Periodically, I try and drop into Annenberg sort of unannounced, and I just grab a tray and sit down and have lunch with a group of students. And I ask them first if I can do that. I've gone running with students, who've invited me to go running with them. So, I look for opportunities. One of the things that's hard, candidly, is that, we have 12 schools at Harvard and everybody would like to see the president, and it's hard to get to all of them all the time. And it's also difficult for me to do my job if I spend all of my time on campus. So I spent a lot of time traveling, at least I used to do it, back when we could all travel, both doing work in Washington in some cases, in other cases visiting with alums and donors in various places around the country. So time is our scarcest resource. It's the ultimate budget constraint. 24 hours in the day, 7 days a week. You can't buy more of it. You can't bank it. So I try and allocate it efficiently.
Thank you, Davey. We're now going to turn to Jennifer Zimmer. Jennifer is the proud mother of Zachary, one student at Harvard, and also of an incoming student who, as far as I know, rumor on the street, is also a basketball recruit. So Ben, someone you may want to keep an eye on for your Harvard Jewish Sports Initiative. Jennifer, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much, President Bacow, Dani, and Ben for doing this. President Bacow, I just, as a Harvard parent, I just wanted to know, I was hoping maybe you'd seen the news from University of South Carolina today on their plans to bring students back to campus and then have them leave by Thanksgiving, leave for good at Thanksgiving break. And their own modeling by their experts show that the next COVID peak would be early December. And I just wondered if that was a possibility for Harvard. That was maybe something you would consider, or even the possibility of bringing one class, like maybe the freshmen or maybe the seniors, maybe the freshmen to give them that introduction and experience they need, and maybe the seniors in the spring to give them that last hurrah if it's safe. And I just wondered whether possibilities you were still considering, if any, because it sounds an awful lot like you've already made up your minds that that the fall semester will be remote.
So first, thanks for the question. As I've tried to say, we haven't made up our mind. We're looking at every possibility. I think every institution that's thinking about having students on campus has thought about the idea of running straight through without breaks so that they could end before Thanksgiving. Part of the concern is that if you didn't do that, sending students home and then bringing them back creates opportunities once again for infection and contagion, simply because you can't control where students have been, and it wouldn't be feasible to then put students in quarantine for 14 days as is recommended if they might be exposed to something. So we're considering lots of alternatives. Candidly, I haven't seen the South Carolina announcement today. I don't have much time to read the news today. But this planning is being done within the college. As I said, each school is doing its own, and the college is looking very, very hard at every possible opportunity. Let me say, we would like to bring students back to campus. Let me be clear about that. But again, we will only do it if we figure out a way to do so that is safe to do it, and in a learning environment that sort of works for those students when they're here. And if we can do that, we will do that. And it may not be all of the students, as you say, it may be some students and not others. One of the things that has become very, very clear in looking at alternatives is there are no good alternatives. All the alternatives look like lousy choices. And I fully understand that once we do decide what to do and announce it, we're going to be criticized no matter what we do. But that I took that on. I understood that when I took on this job, that would be the case for a whole variety of decisions. There's a saying in Washington, D.C. that if you want to be loved, get a dog. I don't expect that everybody's going to love what we're going to do, no matter what we do, but we're doing our best to try and figure out what the right thing is, for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to turn to recent alumna and still member of the broader Harvard Hillel community, Talia Weisberg. Talia, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Dani and President Bacow, for having this conversation. I was hoping that perhaps you could speak more about the reopening process and what that will look like. I know that it's still too early to predict anything, but if Harvard does reopen at some point in the fall or in the spring, whenever that should happen, what will the status of institutions that are shared between students and the broader Cambridge community be? And this ranges from everything between Harvard Square, CVS, to local restaurants, to Harvard Hillel itself.
Yeah, so Talia, that's a really, really good question. This is one of the things that we're struggling with because our students interact with lots and lots of different people. People not just on campus, but people off campus. And one of the things which we have to be concerned about is how can we control that, or what's reasonable. I think it's highly likely that, you know, whenever students come back, everybody is going to be masked, all right? And if you just stop and think about what that means, that's going to affect the nature of social interaction with people greatly, right? Just being able to read certain cues that people give. One of the things which we're going to be looking at is, will we be able to host events where we bring large numbers of people together? Just last week, there was a study that was published that said that bringing people together in a closed space where they are singing is actually quite dangerous. And if you think about what goes on at Hillel, what goes on in any religious ceremony, what goes on with any choral group, that's essentially what people are doing. So I query whether or not we're going to be able to do that, or what it's going to require of us when people can come back together. These are all the uncertainties that we are wrestling with. I mean, here's something to imagine right now, which I think we can all do the following thought experiment. What would move-in day look like with social distancing? When most of you came to campus for the first time as first-year students, many of you came with your families, with your siblings. It was a mass of humanity. We won't be able to do that. So lots of things are going to have to change. Lots of things are going to be different. And we are working through what some of those differences might look like right now. And you're absolutely right that it's not just a question of how will it be different, you know, in September, but how will it be different on whatever day everybody starts to come back, or some start to come back. You know, we'll see what that's like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Talia. Nice to see you. I'm going to turn now to Mishy Harman. Mishy, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, President Bacow. My question is, a relatively large percentage of Harvard College graduates end up going into investment banking and consulting and finance. And I wonder what your thoughts are about the role of the university and a university like ours in producing the next generation of financial elites, and what we can do to maybe encourage people to enter, as you were talking about before, perhaps lower paying but more civically minded professions.
So the world needs all sorts of different people and doing all sorts of different jobs. I always say to students that there are many ways to earn a living. It's more important to live a meaningful life. And to live a life of meaning, you can do that in a variety of ways. Some people do that through what they do for a living, okay? But others do, you know, find a way to lead a meaningful life by how they spend the rest of their time, volunteering, engaging. You know, I've said that I've yet to meet anybody who thinks that the world that we live in is perfect. And this is not a political statement. It's equally true of Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. Now, nobody thinks the world is perfect. And if you don't think it's perfect, the only way it gets better is if good people work to repair it, right? And that's a responsibility which we all bear. And some will do that through their vocation, and some will do it through their avocations, and some will do it through their philanthropy. The point is that I think we each bear a responsibility to find a way to perfect the world or to repair it. And, you know, everybody has to decide for themselves how they're going to do that. And I think if you look at what Harvard alumni do, you will find them represented in virtually every realm of work imaginable. And where people start is not necessarily where they wind up. You know, I came to Harvard fully expecting I was going to be a lawyer. I never practiced law a day in my life. So, you know, careers are really only knowable in retrospect. On the day you retire, you can look back and say, that was my career. Up until then, you're just sort of making plans. And as the saying goes, man plans and God laughs.
A friend of mine actually mentions a saying of his is that doing good and doing well should not be mutually exclusive. And I think that, you know, what you say encompasses that.
Yeah, absolutely true.
I'll say that Ben is planning to go into a career in finance, and I also expect and kind of know that he will be giving a lot back civically as well. So we're going to turn now to Rebecca Ayrton. Mishy, it was good to see you. Rebecca is the undergraduate student president at Harvard Hillel. Rebecca, go ahead.
Good to see you, Rebecca.
Hi, good to see you too. Thank you so much for being here, President Bacow. I know I can say that we definitely miss having you join us for our Shabbat dinners in the Hillel Dining Hall. It was always such an honor to have you there, and it's such an honor to have you here over Zoom with us. I also want to thank you just for making all the difficult decisions that you had to make in March. I'm sure you didn't get a lot of thanks for that, so I just wanted to thank you for keeping our safety in mind.
Thank you.
My question is about the new rules and regulations that Betsy DeVos just released for Title IX. I mean, now is kind of a crazy time for universities, and the new rules and regulations severely roll back protections for survivors of sexual assault. So my question is, what is Harvard's relationship with the Department of Education, and what is Harvard's plan to protect survivors when the current federal legislation is trying to weaken them?
Well, first, thanks for all the kind words. So we submitted comments actually a number of times in response to the regulations, expressing our concern with the proposed regulations. I have to say we're not pleased, but still trying to understand what all of them mean. As you probably know, there were over 2,000 pages of regulations. And the Department of Education, which took 3 years to come up with these changes, has given us until, I believe it is August 14th, to come into compliance. So we're charting a path at this point. We really don't have a lot of discretion on some issues. You know, we don't get to decide which laws we comply with and which ones we don't. So we will be in compliance, but to the extent that we have flexibility, we are going to try and do what we can to ensure that we are faithful to the principles which we articulated some time ago. So, you know, we'll have more to say as we get deeper into our plans for how we're going to respond.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could just follow up on something that we were discussing earlier about the relative success of this past semester, the remote learning portion of this past semester. As the university continues to evaluate what strategies worked and those that did not, what are some of the most important lessons that you have learned from this entire experience? And in the event that classes continue to be held virtually, what do you think can be done better?
Well, you know, if it's the case that we have to be virtual in the fall, it will not be just a replay of what we did this spring. It's important for everybody to remember that, you know, basically the faculty had about 10 days to turn their own lives upside down. It wasn't just students, and to plan to start teaching using a technology that many had never engaged with before. And in effect, what they did is they just took what they were doing and they started Zooming, as we say. If we're online in the fall, we will have spent the entire summer trying to design courses that take advantage of what one is capable of doing online, that build on what we've learned through edX and HarvardX. The courses will look much more like that than they will look like what students experienced this spring. I think the faculty have actually learned quite a bit. At least that's what I've heard from the faculty. Many of whom had zero experience teaching in this modality previously. And so I would expect that we would, you know, the courses would be better courses. They would the faculty would be more creative in ways in which they use technology, and they would be more engaging, I think, for students than perhaps they've been in the past. Having said that, I've also heard from some students, as well as some faculty, that they've been pleasantly surprised with how things have actually turned out. That's not to say that people haven't lost a lot by not being together physically. I think one of the things which we've all learned from this process is how important community actually is, how important it is to be able to come together. I mean, and actually, there was a reason why in our tradition, we require that there be a minyan to do certain things. And I think learning is something which is often a collective activity, and being able to bring people together is really important. So we would like to do that. We want to do that as soon as possible. And until that time comes, we'll continue to try and work to perfect how we can do a better job of creating a sense of community online and teaching and engaging with others online.
Thank you. I've got one question here from Matt Miller that he's writing in. He says, I asked you, President Bacow, how have you been able to keep up with all your other responsibilities as president in the face of the coronavirus crisis, and how have your priorities changed?
Well, you know, for a while, Matt, my first priority, candidly, was just to get healthy. You know, when Adele and I got sick, we realized we weren't going to be much good to anybody if we didn't get better. So that was priority number one. And then, you know, this is a very intensive job, intense job. I think we've all realized that working from home, the boundaries between work and the rest of our life have been blurred. I've been impressed by the number of people who've asked me, well, what books have you read? What movies have you watched? The reality is, and I'm embarrassed to say this, the books that I have read have been in preparation for chairing ad hoc committees for tenure and promotion cases, where I've read books written by faculty that I have to read as part of the promotion case. I haven't had time to read a book. I don't think I've watched a movie start to finish yet, because at least when I've started, it seems like I've fallen asleep, because my days start very early and they end very, very late. But I'm blessed to have a fabulous team that supports me. You know, I can't say enough good things about our provost, who I know was here last week, Alan Garber. If one were to design a provost from scratch to deal with this kind of challenge, it would be Alan, somebody who was trained as a physician and an economist, and who had written previously about how we deal with pandemics and epidemics. I would say the same thing about our executive vice president, Katie Lapp, who was extraordinary, you know, and who had major responsibilities for the city of New York during 9/11. So, you know, battle tested and been through crises before. So I'm blessed with a fabulous team. The deans have been terrific. The vice presidents have been terrific. Everybody's basically stepped up, and we're all trying to work together.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Matt, for that question. We're going to turn to one final question this evening to Harvard Hillel board member and parent as well, Lori Fine. So Lori, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's really great to have your direct perspective. We appreciate it. I had a question. You mentioned the possibility of students taking a gap year. And well, I imagine most parents feel as I do, that they wouldn't want their kids to spend a year playing video games and Netflix. I think there are other possibilities for Harvard students, including volunteering, possibly having a job, possibly pertaining to Hillel, traveling to Israel, where things are much more open, or doing research. So if people do choose to take a gap year, what will be the posture of Harvard University towards that, in terms of allowing it, in terms of allowing them to come back? And would there even be possibilities of helping them to find something useful to do?
Well, you know, a lot depends in terms of what people will be able to do by the conditions that exist, in the world more broadly. One of the concerns, I would have if I were advising my own child about traveling abroad right now is that you never know when there's going to be another breakout and whether or not people will be able to get back given limitations on travel. So these are decisions which individual families are going to have to make. It remains to be seen what kind of internships, volunteer opportunities, job opportunities exist, and a lot will depend upon the state of the virus and not just here in Boston, but wherever people happen to be living at the time. Harvard's not going to force people to go to school. We don't do that. We don't operate a prison. People will make their own choices. What's hard to know at this point, Lori, in responding to your question is how will we react if people do this in large numbers? If a huge number of students decided that they wanted to all take a gap year, or alternatively, let's say first year students, if they took a gap year, it might affect how many students we admit in the fall, because we still have to be able to accommodate students in housing. Similarly, for upper class students, if they took a leave of absence and everybody came back at exactly the same time, our housing system will be stressed. So we will have to manage that. And part of the management of that may be what kinds of guarantees we can offer people who are taking a year off. I don't know the answer to those questions until we know how many students are likely to do that. We'll see. As it is, if we have to de-densify the campus residentially, we may not be able to house students in the same places that they're traditionally housed. We may find ourselves using other kinds of housing when we bring students back, and we're exploring those opportunities as well.
I believe that is unfortunately all the time that we have. I'd like to thank you again, President Bacow, for being so generous with your time and your candor and thoughtfulness this evening, especially in these unprecedented and uncertain times. The leadership which you have demonstrated throughout this pandemic, both within the Harvard community and throughout the broader academic world, has been absolutely incredible. So thank you. I'd also like to thank Rabbi Dani and Jamie Drucker for all their efforts in coordinating this evening's event, of course, in addition to all of their other continued work in making Harvard Hillel the special place that it is.
Well, let me just say, if I can exercise presidential privilege, to say thank you to all of you for organizing this event, for the opportunity to participate, but beyond that, for creating the kind of welcoming place that Hillel is, and for creating a resource not just for the Jewish community at Harvard, but for Harvard more broadly. I know Hillel reaches out in a variety of ways. I suspect many of the people who've been on this call are not necessarily those who are regular participants in Hillel activities. And so Adele and I want to thank you for how warmly you've welcomed us when we come there, both for Shabbat, for the Hagim, and to share other opportunities as well. And we look forward to the day when we can all be together again.
Thank you so much, President Bacow, for those words and for your time and your wisdom and your leadership. Also, thank you, Ben, so much for being involved this evening and for your spectacular questions. Tonight concludes the spring series that we've been doing on coronavirus, but due to popular demand, we will be back in the summer. I'll be kicking things off with Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel on June 2nd, and then a couple of weeks later with Justice Stephen Breyer of the Supreme Court. I also want to point out that tomorrow we'll be having another event called Be Strong and of Good Courage, a discussion with authors David Makovsky and Dennis Ross. So that is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for joining us throughout this series. There's a verse in Psalms that says, Torah Hashem Tamima Meshivat Nafesh, that Torah is restorative, it restores life. And I think part of what we've been trying to do with this series is to restore life in a way by analyzing coronavirus and our current situations from various angles. Hopefully that's given a sense of solace, a sense of comfort, and really a sense of restoration. I wish each and every one of you good health, and I look forward to seeing you back here on June 2nd. Thank you again, and thank you, President Bacow.
Thank you. Good to see you.